Chapter 15. Swallowing the Key. Perspective is everything. Will had made that observation on one of our first dates when he pointed to the glass on his left that was simultaneously on my right, and it stuck with me. At the time, I thought he was handing me a clue about how he navigated the world. Soon enough, I began to see the principle as something I could apply to our relationship, as in, we may disagree strongly or react differently to various situations, but by acknowledging our differences in perspective, we can avoid rejecting the other person's point of view in order to feel heard. But how can we understand a significant other's perspective if A, we don't have the experience, maturity, or desire to identify differences, and B, we lack the ability to recognize there is no right or wrong, except in situations where abuse is evident? Often, with the inevitable misunderstandings and even heartbreaks that come along with most serious relationships, we forget that our opinions, priorities, and needs aren't better than our partners. They are just different. Unrealistic expectations are not our fault. It's the fairy tale of romanticized love that has instilled the many false beliefs that enforce, if we love each other, we must think alike, right? If you really love me, you must know all my needs at all times without me having to tell you, right? And if you don't live up to these expectations, I have the right to disrespect you, treat you like an enemy, and look for what I need elsewhere because you are choosing not to give me what I need, right? No, not true. Still, we frequently feel betrayed and unloved when our significant other is oppositional in perspective to how we think things should be. In our discomfort, we ignore that not allowing for differences is unkind to the person we say we love so deeply. It's also unkind to ourselves. We rarely pause to measure or even identify the damage done to us by romanticized ideals, from movies, songs, TV shows, books, ads, and other people's glossy narratives of their dreamy lives. With those happily ever after fairy tales in our heads, we dive into committed relationships as if we know how to have healthy, deeply loving bonds. Because those stories make love look so easy, showing partners always in agreement. We think that's what real love must always be. If you agree with me, you love me. If you love me, you agree with me. Though I don't consider myself a romantic, I expected Will to save me and heal my past hurts, as if the traumas, chaos, and depression experienced before we met would magically disappear within the ether of our ecstatic love. If I hadn't been caught up in the fantasy of how my Prince Charming would make all my pain disappear as he rode me off into the sunset, I'm sure that, as a new wife and mother, I would have given more space to my own history. I would have acknowledged that I had only recently tried to extract myself from the Hollywood life in the hope of making a smaller, more intimate one in Baltimore. Or maybe I would have been more thoughtful about my choice to stop therapy once I went off Prozac, not long after a series of devastating losses that I hadn't processed. In many ways, Will and I were like so many young couples who grow up with instability and dysfunction, but do not acquire the tools to confront them. We were starting our journey after being thrust together into expanding families, booming careers, and big shifts in fortune and responsibility. Besides that, Will and I were trying to figure it all out under the increasingly hot lights that come with being celebrities and having to live up to a fantasy version of married life. True, not everyone deals with the glare of the public eye. Yet, most newlyweds have everyday challenges, some expected, some not, and need to show the world that they've won the sweepstakes of marital bliss. Admitting to growing pains is severely frowned upon. While fairy tale thinking gets in the way of accepting differences in perspective, the other trap for me was perfectionism. Denying the humanness of the people we love is a trap. My thinking was, I'm sorry, sir, ma'am, but in our relationship, you can no longer be human. I've been hurt enough. From here on out, you better get every damn thing right. And don't worry about me, because I'm on point when it comes to loving you, even if I'm full of pain. Oh yeah, I was textbook. Love is hard enough to define on our own terms, and harder still in relationships where we're bound to have different points of view on what love is, how to love others, and how to love ourselves. And the thing is, in the game of love, we are all depending on each other while navigating those different perspectives at the same time. One of the big challenges I faced in the beginning of our marriage was that, rather than expressing disappointment or bruised feelings, I held fast to the motto, never let them see you sweat. My fallback position, rather than showing vulnerability, was to hide, cover my feelings, or fight, whether overtly or covertly. Being a graduate of the University of the Bmore Streets, I was quick to pop off in the early days of relating to Will when there were disagreements between us. Will could talk circles around me at that time, so when I felt he wasn't listening and was being disrespectful, that would piss me off. Once in a heated argument, I let go and F you, fighting in the style I knew best. Will wasn't having it. He said in effect, I can't be in a relationship with you. This isn't going to work. He broke up with me on the spot. His explanation was that, considering the abuse he had grown up watching between his parents and how things had escalated rapidly from verbal to physical, he was not willing to participate in this kind of intense interaction with me. So you gonna break up with me over some words? I asked. Will answered, yes. Over the next week, I tried to consider his perspective. My experience was different from his, but in certain relationships in which I felt threatened, slinging words was one way to protect myself. Still, I could see that there was a more respectful way of handling communication. We were only broken up for 1 week. However, Will has set an important boundary, and he did so in a way that I couldn't ignore. It was one thing to add profanity to the expression of ideas or viewpoints, but another thing when it was used in a personal attack. My eyes were open to how words could become weaponized and just as violent as blows. Similarly, disrespect can lead to emotional violence, another reason to be mindful of how words are spoken. Will made it clear what he was willing to tolerate. If we're going to be together, we can't do that to each other. I agreed. After that incident, I didn't curse at him again. Not for decades, at least. Our agreement not to use profanity or disrespectful language or tones led to improved communication. But the unintended consequence of our more respectful talks was that they were often devoid of the honest expression of emotions, sometimes overly intellectual or analytical. Imagine having to sit down and speak about the moments when some women flirted with him in front of me and having to be cool, even-toned, analytical, and dispassionate about it. This pattern kept us safe from talking about real feelings, but also from experiencing them. Some couples manage to argue authentically. In our case, our arguments verged on being too sanitized and controlled, to the point where I'd lose genuine expression and suppress deep feelings. There would come a day when I'd wake up and feel fully disconnected from emotional honesty, my inner compass, and that would wreak havoc, but we'll get to that. By the time we were married with children, it was obvious to me that Will and I had very different perspectives about the trappings of fame. Ripples of our differences showed up early in our relationship, but I tended to ignore them because the ride was all-consuming. Magic Mountain? My homegirl Keisha was excited. You sure it won't be too crazy? It's a weekday, I assured her, and went over the plan I put together for her and her family, who were out visiting me, to join Will and Trey and me on an outing to a nearby area amusement park. Will was on his way to becoming the undisputed champion of the box office and had already spent more than 6 years on TV screens in the homes of millions of people around the world. Being welcoming to fans was part of his work ethic. But, increasingly, it was hard to go places just with our crew to have a good time. For that reason, we tried to go out when things were less crowded so we could wander freely and enjoy ourselves. Everything was rolling pretty smoothly, as I recall, until a group of fans spotted Will and began running toward us, practically in hysterics as they tried to get close to him. It was like a loud, excited stampede. With a primitive survival instinct and probably some PTSD kicking in, I started screaming, "Back the fuck up! Back up!" In full fight or flight mode, I couldn't stop myself, even with Trey standing in between Will and me. Terrified and feeling trapped, I was ready to swing wildly and dared anyone to come closer. The crowd paused and looked at me as if I were insane, Will included. When I looked up at him, he seemed bewildered by the intensity of my reaction and could only ask me to calm down. Physically, we had two different perspectives because of our different vantage points. At 6'2", Will could see over the crowd enough to know that there was no real threat. I'm 5 feet tall on a good day, tiny compared to everyone charging at me. And in my wash of adrenaline, all I could see was the oncoming rush of bodies. All I could hear were screams as hands went reaching across my face. Will managed to calm the horde, and we all went about our day unscathed. But I was shaken. To him, I had overreacted, even though I'd been in an unconscious full-court press trauma response. To me, he was underreacting and unwilling to see how getting mobbed would make me feel that we were all being threatened. This was classic. You could take this example of conflicting perspectives and apply it to everything else in our entire marriage and get the same result. Sometimes you can find common ground to balance out your differences. But if you don't attempt to reconcile the warring viewpoints at play, resentment, anger, and regret will only grow. Our perspectives were reversed when it came to paparazzi. For Will, photographers brought out a trauma response similar to the one I had with crowds. For him, taking unwanted photos was a violation, and he perceived that as a threat. It raised his alarm system for fight or flight. With paparazzi, though they can be annoying, I didn't feel the same lack of control I did with swarming crowds. I learned early in my career to create my own comfort zone by acknowledging the people with cameras and saying, "I'll give you the pictures you want, but you gotta back up. Give me 20 feet. As long as they didn't come up right in my face, I was good. "No problem, Jada," was the response I'd usually get. So the Paps and I shared mutual respect. But all of this, crowds, fans, Paps, came with the territory. And I would have to learn to deal. I also learned that being in Hollywood didn't mean we'd left where we came from behind. I mean, I was living the supposed dream. And one of my closest friends was murdered, even though he was music royalty. And it was here where, in adapting, Will and I shared a perspective that our responsibility was to provide for and to bring as many people as we possibly could along with us on our ride. Some might call this survivor's guilt. This meant that he and I were usually the first calls whenever anyone in our circle needed help. Those startling calls during the hours when you know it ain't good news would roll in. Folks needing bail money, help after an accident, or funds to pay for a funeral when a person's son got murdered. Or someone had an illness and was in need of a special doctor. Someone was in trouble and had to pay for a lawyer. We had the resources, wanted to help, and felt obligated to do so if we could. Every time a call came in, I was humble and grateful that we had come as far as we had. But I did realize that even with our combined success, We didn't have the magic to banish all woes and make life problem-free for our family, friends, and extended community, though others might have hoped that was the case. We spent a lot of time trying to be heroes for a lot of people while not focusing enough on ourselves and one another. It was as though saving others came to define our worth. We were like so many people in every walk of life who, though well-intentioned, find our value in overextending ourselves on behalf of others to the point of being incapable of self-care. Will and I were equally clueless in this respect. Some of our differences in perspective weren't problematic. Will wanted to be one of the biggest names in Hollywood and was always surprised that I didn't. For my part, I admired his drive, his tenacity, and his courage to push the boundaries of what some deemed acceptable for an artist of color. He set out to show the world that an actor of color was as viable with global audiences as our white counterparts, and to open doors for others in underrepresented communities. I was proud of him for that. With both of us balancing career and family, there was even less time left over for us to check in with each other and address differences in a deep way. Every attempt to resolve our competing perspectives ended up with us kicking the can down the road in Will's decree. We'll get to that later. That became the theme song of our relationship. Everything blew up fast. Time was the commodity we did not have. Will was on his fast train to stardom, and I was putting in my own fuel, doing my best to live up to the unattainable standards of being a perfect wife and mother. I had no one to blame. Not only had I signed up for this ride, I had taken my seat on it within my handmade gilded cage. Then I swallowed the damn key. By the time Jaden was a toddler, our household was rapidly outgrowing our home in Westlake. The guest rooms were always filled with visiting relatives and friends of Will's who'd been by his side for years. There was Charlie Mack for one, who, mind you, lived with us before Jaden was born and liked to blast Chico DeBarge at 5 a.m., damn near every morning, until we had a conversation about it. The great thing is that Charlie is like my big bro, and we could be on some real talk, always. After just a few words, he smiled and even looked surprised that he had been so unaware. From then on, I never again heard Chico as the sun came up. Will deferred to me when it came to most of the decisions relating to running our bustling household. During this time frame, we were most likely the only black couple in our neighborhood, which made for some interesting encounters with the mostly white service providers, who, though polite, appeared unaccustomed to being hired by young black homeowners, famous or not. Most of the time, I handled whatever issues came up, but if there was something I really wanted Will's input on, of course I would ask. That's what I did on the day I called him at work after an incident with an exterminator. I could tell by the tone of Will's voice when he answered his phone that it wasn't a good time. Being as succinct as possible, I prefaced my recap by saying, I've always felt like I had a good rapport with this man. We were cool. However, I went on. Since our pest problem had been resolved, I'd informed the exterminator that we wouldn't need his services any longer, adding, we'll call if anything changes. With me inside the kitchen and the man outside my kitchen door, he forcefully insisted that we did need to continue his services. I held my ground, thanked him again, and asked him to bill us as he had done in the past. No, the man said, indignant, as he stepped through the door into the kitchen. You are going to pay me now. Who do you think you're talking to? I said. You no longer want my services, then you pay me now. With his chest puffed up, he inched toward me, raising all my safety alarms, not only for me, but for Jaden, who was in the house. A switch flipped inside me to protect mine at all cost. In fight mode, I grabbed the glass blender jar off my kitchen counter and raised it, warning him, you better get the fuck out my house. The man immediately backed out my kitchen door and was gone. What shook me most wasn't him. It was me, where I was willing to go. That place within me hadn't been activated in a minute, but it was definitely still primed to explode. The other piece was that I was hurt that someone with whom I had been cool could be so disrespectful and violate the safety in my own home. Will heard me out, saying little until I let him know, I'm okay, but can you believe he did that? His brief response confirmed he was in the middle of something. He basically said that I had handled it and we would talk about it when he got home. Then I did what I usually did. I bossed up, got steely, and hid my need for reassurance. With a quick, cool, I said goodbye, and we hung up. We didn't talk about it later. We should have. It never should have been okay for me to gloss over someone making me feel violated in my own home. So much so that I'd felt it necessary to back him down. It never should have been okay for me to let Will gloss over it either. Had I clearly expressed my feelings? In hindsight, I'm almost positive that I had not. That is a confession. Even to this day, it is difficult for me to express how I really feel at any given moment. Any vulnerability makes me feel uncomfortably vulnerable. My inner monologue was going off. Will should know I need him and bring his ass home. Period. The biggest mistake I constantly made was thinking Will thought exactly how I did, and that I shouldn't have to tell him how I was feeling. He should already know. Does any of this sound familiar? So many conversations and so many aspects of our lives got away from us. We had to learn on the fly to handle the issues of growing a family, running a household, organizing the details of being constantly on the go. Ours was a classic version of learning to fly an airplane while we were still building it, as more and more passengers wanted to come on board. And of course, we wanted to share our lives with the people we loved. If we were heading to Aspen for Christmas, it wasn't just us and the 3 kids. It was us plus 40, family, friends, team members. The first time Will and I went to visit Aspen, I fell in love with the winter wonderland in the Colorado resort town. It reminded me of an old-fashioned holiday card. Once we had a family and wanted to show the kids a white Christmas, Aspen became our holiday destination of choice. And in the season that always gave me joy, I loved going all out. But we had no idea how this was done. We were on a constant learning curve, not to mention that every year we would have to top ourselves. Besides Christmas planning and all that it entailed, one year Will had a brainstorm. We should throw a New Year's Eve party for our anniversary. Oh my God. I love a good party. But this soon became an annual celebration that I had to figure out, and a year-round planning job as the guest list expanded to include every celeb in Aspen during that time. There were endless logistics. Will, the showman and MC, was like the executive producer, dreaming up experiences for all to enjoy, whereas I was the assistant producer, information point person, and for a while, everybody's Girl Friday. Who was flying from where and getting picked up when, how many were at the house, and who all was staying in the hotel rooms. Who needed ski lift tickets and local transportation, and where were the toothbrushes. Even though I had Mia and Fawn to help, I was the on-the-ground communication hub at this point. As a new wife and mom, I was often overwhelmed by trying to adapt to an ever larger whirlwind. Until I was able to put systems in place and hire more team members to help me, I kept putting one foot in front of the other, hoping to accommodate everyone's needs in our expanding world. Everyone around us saw only the glitter and excitement of our lives. Very rarely were people in touch with what was involved when 40-plus family and friends went on a Christmas vacation, or how exhausting it was to corral everyone on New Year's Eve, 1999, my second wedding anniversary, when the world was supposed to end. And I really just wanted to be quiet with my husband and family, and fly off to D.C. to stay overnight at the Clinton White House. The news broke in September. Actor Will Smith will host Washington's ultimate party of 99, the multi-million-dollar New Year's Eve celebration on the mall, for which a who's who of rock music will sing backup. This was a celebration on a scale never attempted by a president at a pivotal moment on the planet when millions were terrified about the cliff we were going over into a new millennium. Our family's inclusion in history was thrilling beyond words. But when Will told me we were invited to stay overnight at the White House after a long, tiring night with young children, I had to say, this is too much. Jada, it's the Lincoln bedroom. We get to sleep in the same room as the Emancipation Proclamation. Will, I get it. But after that long night, I'm not trying to stay in Lincoln's dusty-ass bedroom. Will thought I was being ridiculous. He couldn't believe it. Sorry, babe. This is history. These kids will remember this all their lives. I didn't bother to tell him that 15-month-old Jaden would have zero memory of it. Long story short, I was overruled. And we went in style. Gianni Versace designed outfits for us both, and Will rocked the stage. The world did not end, and I survived, although I was able to say, I told you so, to Will about all 5 of us trying to sleep in that small-ass bed in that dusty-ass bedroom, Emancipation Proclamation and all. It's inevitable for anyone willing to take a ride on someone else's bullet train that at some point you start to feel lost while traveling to that person's destinations. It happens to so many of us, not just in the entertainment world, but in many facets of life. To prevent this, I fought hard to have my own professional identity, separate from Will. But to my shock, after I happily became Mrs. Will Smith, it was as if it was the only name I ever had. Even after years of establishing myself as Jada Pinkett, it was like everything I had done before my marriage, all I had built, no longer mattered. My identity had never been hijacked in a relationship before. It was no fault of Will's, of course, but of the age-old tropes that portray women who marry successful men as doing so for their entire validation. She dare not try to have an identity beyond who she is in service of his identity. Before long, I noticed people who wanted a piece of me because they wanted to get to Will. That wasn't what I expected when I went in to meet with Harvey Weinstein about a short film I had produced with the wonderful Ann Carley that we wanted to adapt into a full-length feature called When Willows Touch. It was written and directed by the then up-and-coming, truly gifted Shonda Rhimes. I had starred opposite the extraordinarily talented actor Jeffrey Wright. The meeting with Harvey was to talk about acquiring the script to make the movie. He was all business, which I appreciated. But he made it clear that he would be interested in moving ahead only if Will's name was attached to the project as an executive producer. When Harvey said this, I was quiet and had to think hard. I couldn't do it. I understood from a Hollywood perspective, Will Smith was the big brand name. But so was Denzel Washington, who was very interested in starring in the project. Although Will and I had projects we developed together in those days, the projects came about organically. We never collaborated as a play to get things made. I could see the trap. I knew if I yielded to that request on this project, it would be expected the next time and the next time after that by everyone else. With regret, I withdrew the film. I refused to trade on Will's success. Our most profound difference in perspectives was a clash in our visions of what happiness looked like. Will was living his dream, and that meant I must be living mine too, through him. He couldn't understand why I was often unhappy. His attitude was, why would you want for anything? Look at the life and opportunities I provide for you. All we get to have and do and be. My attitude was, yes, you have a point. But I have hitched a ride on someone else's train, someone I love, Except I don't know how to jump off from time to time to ride my own train. It feels like I can't grasp my own journey. At times I feel resentful and angry. Mostly, I don't know what to do about it. We can be overloved, underloved, overworked, underworked. Each costs much. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Whether it's love or work, over or under, all of it can feel like a cage, and any of us might swallow the key. And do you know what that key unlocks? Our power to create a fulfilling life we are proud of. So many of us are willing to swallow the key to our own treasure troves in order to have the love and acceptance we desire from others. Too often we feel the need to be more in order to be loved and not abandoned. Women are chronically burdened by having to prove that we have value and therefore should be allowed to live, as Clarissa Pinkola Estes puts it. Sometimes the key we swallow is the truth-telling part of us that questions whether a relationship is feeding or starving us. If we swallow the key, we can't ask the questions. It's hard to look at our traps, even when they make themselves obvious. One example is when we are being objectified and used for enjoyment instead of being sought as a partner in a quest to be seen and loved. Or when we are expected to simply be compliant and fun and never complain because we fear these words. You know there's a side chick dying to take your place. Here's the deal. When we abandon ourselves by swallowing the key to our happiness for the alleged happiness of someone else, there is no happiness to be found by either party. You still feel pain, and the other feels your resentment. But if we are courageous, life can offer another kind of pain that's far more sacred. Pain that will deliver you your pride, your power, your happiness, instead of self-betrayal. It's up to you to whether you're brave enough to face that pain. Only you know what's holding you back from spitting out the key and using it to open the gates to your inner kingdom. Do you want your key back? Write down how you may have lost it and consider why you want to regain it. And if you have been through an arduous passage of retrieving your key already, why not write down your key lessons? Take a moment to pat yourself on the back and be prepared to share that story with someone who's in need of how to do the same.